Hello. My name is Kate Falanga. I'm the director of QA at Huge. I've been there for over 4 years. There's my Twitters. This is the hashtag for the conference. And if you're on the webcast and want to ask questions or do any of those things, I'm pretty sure that's how you do that, is that you tweet at AST_news and you make sure that you include a question mark. Cool, so let's get started. So my talk is about testing as your brand, sell it. What Huge is actually an advertising company, but they do a lot of digital work as well. So it's more about, so we've done Lexus.com, Morgan Stanley, we do a lot of stuff with Nike, a lot of the brands that you've heard of. So just to kind of get a feel for at least this room, who here kind of self-identifies as a tester, which is probably going to be most people? Okay, quite a lot of you. As test manager, more managey type peoples? Okay. People who are not one of those two things? Okay. But in general, I'm going to assume that testing is also your brand, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. It's something that you deeply care about, because you've put the effort into actually being here, or you've put in the effort to actually being on the webcast today. But QA and testing kind of has an image problem. I think we're all kind of aware of that. Especially so when I first started about 4 years ago at Huge, but I've also heard it pretty frequently about a lot of the testers that I've talked with. Testing is entry level, like it's the first thing that you do. If you're not a developer or something like that, you just do testing. How easy can that be? It's unskilled. You know, testing isn't necessarily a skill. It's not really respected. It's not important until it is, obviously. It's kind of treated as more like the internal fails of a cop show. So you're kind of like, oh, you know, trying to find fault with people. You have to try to prove what you're trying to do all the time. People don't really believe what you're trying to do. There's not a whole lot of trust in a lot of organizations. Hopefully not your organizations, but that's definitely something that I've heard. So, you know, there's a bug in production, who gets blamed? Usually it's a tester. I remember when I first started, it was pretty much that kind of attitude of, here, test this. You have 2 days testing all the things. Test what, who, what, huh? But fast forward kind of 4+ years, and now we're in more of an agile environment. We're embedded within the actual dev team, and we're really thought about as kind of respected contributors to the actual product as well as the project itself. And that became through a lot of effort through myself, the testers that have worked at Huge over a period of time, and lots of people as well. So this was quite a lot of effort to kind of get from point A to point B, and that's what I'm going to kind of talk about, some of the things I've learned along the way. And Huge being an advertising agency, I've kind of learned about some of the concepts of advertising and marketing, and be able to kind of apply it to kind of what testing could be, and kind of make that kind of work for me. I'm not necessarily a marketing genius, but I work with marketing geniuses, and it's kind of hard not to kind of learn a little something across the way. So we're going to talk about how to get started, how to own your reputation, how to talk to non-testers about testing, some of the lessons I've learned along the way. More importantly, I'm going to talk about you. I'm going to do open season questions. So getting started, how do you kind of start down this path if you haven't already? Step one is you really have to change how you see yourself. If you feel like there's nothing you can do, if you feel like there's no change that you can actually make, you're not going to be able to make any changes. You have to start with yourself. I don't know how many people recognize this guy from back in the day. Maybe I'm dating myself, I don't know. So, you know, Stuart Smalley from SNL. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. Sometimes you really have to think that way, because it can sometimes be demoralizing. People don't really understand what you do or why you're doing it. You know what? I'm a professional. I have skills. I have something to bring to the table. So really kind of thinking about that first, and that I can make a change within my organization and also within my community if necessary. You kind of need to start there. I mean, this guy is also a senator now, so who knows what can happen. After that is to kind of research where you work. Karen kind of touched on this a little bit this morning. I'll kind of follow up a little bit as well. How does your company make money? And how do you fit into that? Is it a product in that if they sell a product and the profit of that pays your salary? Or it's like me, where we're more of a service organization, where I'm billed out hourly and I actually make money for the company. That sounds good, but then it's also a cost that we actually have to bill to the client, so that makes our product more expensive to sell. So that might be hard to actually get work that way. So we have to factor that in. I can't necessarily put 5 testers on a project just because it'd be more profitable, that we won't actually win business that way. Knowing that helps me have those conversations that we'll talk about a little bit later about with some of the stakeholders and kind of how to work through that if I understand where the money's going. Because honestly, as Karen mentioned again this morning, this is a business, money drives it. You have to understand where it's going and how you kind of fit into that. What are the major stakeholders and decision makers associated with what you do? Is it a project managers, products, technology? Do you know the people who are making decisions that affect you? And more importantly, do they know you? Should they? I'd pretty much argue, yes, they probably should know who you are if they don't already. What do those people do, like for realsies? What makes their job difficult? What is painful for them? It's actually important to know and understand what other people's jobs are. Just like we want other people to understand what we do, we should understand what other people do as well. Also to make sure what's painful for them, and we'll kind of go through that in a little bit later about why that's important, but it's also nice to know about what's good about someone's job, but what's bad about that job. We may not actually see what's difficult about people's jobs, and that's actually very important to have relationships and communication and collaborate with people if you know what's hard for them, because you can actually try to make it easier. You make friends that way. And these are also all really reasonable questions. I think a lot of people think that, like, oh, I wouldn't be able to kind of, like, if you're kind of more junior, you may not know, like, you know, this feels weird, I'm not sure I can ask these questions, but these are totally fair questions to ask. I don't think anyone would be fired because they're asking these questions. Don't blame me or anything if that happens, like, but this is all fair things to kind of know and to kind of be able to kind of figure out. So don't be afraid to ask these questions. So anyone who works with me knows I say this all the time, and that's own your own reputation. Again, Karen kind of touched on a lot of things this morning, and Carol in another session did as well, to kind of own your own reputation. So you can never really 100% control how people think of you, but I don't think people really understand how much power that you have to control how people see you and what you do. We have a significant amount of power in this area. Everyone has a significant amount of power in this area. You are empowered to own your own reputation. There's things that you can do to make sure people see you in the way you want to be seen. If you think about politicians or celebrities, they have image consultings. Our clients hire us as an advertising company to make you feel differently about Captain Crunch, and you do because of what we do. You can do the same thing for testing. You can change how people associate testing with just how you interact with testing. Every interaction you have, you're representing yourself, your team, and also your profession. I don't mean that to be scary, because it can sound scary, but that's actually true. You represent who and what we are. So if you're careful about how you actually interact with people and how you work with things and how you say what you say, especially in the context-driven world, we have a lot of discussions about what words mean, because words are important. Words can define our reality. So let's define the reality the way that we want the reality to be. We have more control over this than a lot of people realize. So what's some things that you can do besides just kind of paying attention to your reputation? Especially within an organization, what tangibly that you can do. This is another thing I say a lot, the people that I work with get bored with. Set clear expectations. Don't have surprises. Who are you? What do you do? How do you want people to interact with you? Do you know the answers to those questions? You should. Think about it. Answer those questions. And then write them down. It's helpful to write them down. I'm a little bit more of the agile school of thought, so I don't really like documentation, especially from a testing standpoint. Test script's bad. But writing things down makes them very easy to share. So if people want to discuss testing, people want to discuss how you can contribute to a project or a product, and you're not around, make it easy for them to share that information. Or if a new person comes on board, or a new project manager, or a new boss, or something like that, have something ready for them to read and share about who you are and what you do. I'm going to go through a couple of examples. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, because it's not really about, this is kind of what works for me, but it might be different for your organization. My organization is kind of different from kind of being an agency. Agency life is a little bit different from more of a product company. So what I can do is going to be a little bit different than what you guys would do. But a lot of this kind of would still apply, at least I think so. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong. Hopefully you will. So here's what I think is important for a QA team. And I know QA is kind of one of those scary things in context-driven as well, but that's just what our team is called in my organization. So we're the QA team. So I think we should be embedded, empowered, engaged, and ever evolving. So it's short and sweet. It's pithy. It's very easy to kind of think about and advertise, but it's also kind of very powerful. And it's something that can really kind of show about what I think is important and to share it. And I can actually, if I think about this and we all agree on this is important as a team, everything else that I do can be based on this about what is important and how to move forward. Is this actually part of our kind of mission statement? And I go into more detail, and I'll go through this quickly, about what this actually means to actually kind of demonstrate what this is. I have a blog post about this at some point if you want to Google it, or you can ask me later if you really want these slides. I think I post them afterwards. So kind of going through what these are. In addition to that, kind of about who you are and what you do, there's a difference, at least in my world, between title and role. So you might be called a QA analyst, but you might be actually act as a QA lead. Okay, so if you're a QA lead, what would you do? And this kind of sets the expectation about what, so if I'm saying that someone's a QA lead, this is my expectation of what that person will do. And it's also what my expectation that someone else would look at that person to do. Then I change this pretty much for every project, but this is an example of it. So if you're going to be an analyst on a project, this is what you would do. If you're an engineer on a project, this is what you would do. And then I make sure I document it and show people, you have an engineer on your project. This person should be doing this. They should be doing this, and so look to them to do those things. Be proactive. Talk to people. Form relationships outside of your immediate circle. If you find more people to talk to, and they're kind of seen as someone who is very helpful and nice, then people are going to be proactive to talk to you as well. I'll go through some kind of examples of kind of some of the things that we've done. So one of the things that we've done is we'll have different kind of discipline meetings, and kind of at least how I got started and several years ago is how we kind of got started as far as I did a slideshow like this, kind of the document. Document doesn't have to be like a Word document, it could be a slideshow, it could be anything. And I kind of did a roadshow about who we are and what we did to different kind of team meetings. So, hey, project management, when you talk to clients about who we are and what we do, I'm going to give you the information that you should be talking to clients about. So speaking at different team meetings. And also, I've had those people, project managers, business analysts, different kinds of groups within our organization, speak at our team meetings. I want to know what you guys do, and I want to know how you want to interact with us. So having that kind of shared kind of roadshow of like speaking at different team meetings is very helpful. Most, at least within my organization, people meet like once a month or every 2 weeks or so on a kind of discipline level to kind of talk about stuff. Take advantage of that. You have all the people in the specific discipline in one room. Easy audience. Get them. Help on side projects. So if someone needs help for something that is not project related, some sort of side project, something to do, help with them. Be helpful. Be nice. Be sociable. Go to social events. You don't have to do it all as an individual, but encourage other people within your kind of organization. Again, everyone represents testing within your organization. So if you're not going to that social event because you don't feel like it, someone else goes to a social event because they feel like it, they're still representing you and representing your brand. Collaborate. Collaborate's really big, especially within my organization. It's actually one of our core values. And it's also something that's actually really important and been very helpful for us. So you've documented some stuff. You're sharing things around. Be ready to share those, to change those definitions to a point. You are the professional. You are the expert. So you'll know where the line is about how far you want to change stuff. But they may have feedback about, like when I'm going back to the QA lead, about what that QA lead should be. A project manager, a boss, a C-level person might have a different expectation and may want you to change it. That's okay, to a point. Know where your lines are, but be willing to change things as necessary. Collaborate with people. If you work with people and don't have that kind of hard line in the sand and be able to kind of be a little bit flexible, people are going to be coming to you a little bit more often to kind of to share ideas. Just kind of like adjust a little bit. So kind of like good ideas could also come from anywhere. This might be what you think is the right thing to do, but you might have someone else come say something, oh, well, something you haven't even thought of. It's always a good idea to kind of engage with other people and get ideas from lots of different places. So invite feedback, propose options, and be okay with change. So one of the things I like to do with proposing options is I like to propose only options that you're okay with. It kind of gives the illusion of choice to the other person, but it's only ones that you're okay with. It's kind of a good move to have. So it's as an example, oh, you want me to test in the dev environment, but the dev environment is not all that stable. Okay, I can do that in order to close the feedback loop and have it a little bit shorter, but I'm still going to have to test in QA, so is there going to have to be another line of testing? Or you can have me wait and test in QA so it's not duplication of effort. Timeline's still the same. I'm still going to be doing what I need to do, but I'm giving you an option, one or both. And so like, oh, okay, you're working with me. There's options here. But there's still options that you're okay with. Testing still is going to be performed the way that you feel is necessary to do that. Talking to non-testers about testing. So who do you talk to? Don't assume that people don't need to know what you do. They just need to know in different ways and to different levels. Going back to trying to understand how a lot of the stakeholders and what their pain points are, find ways to make their jobs easier. An example of that is that we took on the responsibility of defining what browsers and devices we're going to test with, because testing all the things is not really an option. So if not that, then what? So we'll list that out. So we'll kind of limit it to five browsers and 5 devices, and we'll kind of took it upon ourselves to do a lot of research and be very knowledgeable about user statistics for different browsers and different devices. That was actually helpful for a lot of different people. Yes, it was a pain point for us that we tried to solve, but it's also really helpful for developers. They also don't want to support IE7. We don't want to either. Let's just not do that. But it's also really helpful for client services. We set clear expectation with the clients about what we will and will not do. So there's not going to be an argument later when they find a bug in something that we didn't support, because I've already defined it, I've documented it, I've given it to the project managers to give the clients. They know what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. We've set very clear expectations. So there's not going to necessarily, well, there might be an argument later because that happens. But it's easier when you have like, hey, remember this document that you looked at and agreed to? It makes it a lot easier to do that. So it actually helped multiple people within an organization just actually trying to solve the pain for ourselves. One kind of danger in this area about being kind of very collaborative and things like that as well, you do want to make sure that you're consistent in your message. If there's other testers, other people on your team, if you guys are saying very conflicting things, you're not going to be super successful here. So you do need to make sure that whatever your message is, that you're consistent in it. So whenever I do these types of things, I always make sure that I talk to other testers as well. Here's what I'm saying that you do. Here's what I'm saying that you're good at. You need to be good at it if I'm saying that you're good at it. Cool? Everyone's like, cool. And luckily, they're all really awesome people, so they're all really awesome at lots of different things. So it's very easy for me to kind of to tell people how great they can be, because they are, in fact, great. But it's also really good to make sure that you're constantly on the same page with people in order to be consistent in your message. You also want to tailor your message to the audience. What you talk to a developer about, what you talk to a project manager about, what you talk to an executive about might be the same thing, but in different ways. An executive, as you might guess, has limited time, so you want to be very, very concise in the information that you give them. Only give them what they need to do and make sure that it's very actionable. I need a decision, I know, or I need you to know this to inform a decision that you need to make. So be very, very concise in it, very, very short, and whatever way that you know that person can kind of get that information. Are they more verbal or are they more written? I would actually suggest always writing something, even if someone's more verbal and likes to have conversations, always write an email afterwards about saying, like, hey, as we discussed, blah, 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 blah. That way you kind of have a trail of record as well. But a developer might be a lot more interested in some of the technical things that you do. So you might go into a lot more detail with a developer or someone on your project or product team than you would with someone kind of more further away from what you do. So the level of detail is going to be dependent on how close they are to what you do. If they're very close to what you do, they're going to want a lot of detail. So give them a lot of detail. If they're further away, less detail. Accentuate the positive. A lot of testers, not so much context-driven people, but definitely heard the phrase, hey, what do you do? I break stuff. That's what I do for a living, I break stuff. I think we know that that's not 100% true, number one. Number two, it's also super, super negative. If you think about, hey, this really awesome thing that you built, my entire job is to make that thing terrible. My entire job is to break it. My entire job is to find all the very negative problems with it. Some degree true, but also not particularly positive. If we think about what we do is how we help make great software, it's a true statement. We help make great software. It's also very positive. How do we add value on a project? How do you add value to what you do? Testing is probably the majority of it, but it's probably not all of it. You probably do multiple different things to add value. Give feedback, talk to people, just kind of being the center of location of information for some things. There's probably things that you do beyond testing that is also adding value, making sure that people kind of understand that you're adding value in lots of different ways. Make sure you know how you're adding value. Obviously, testing is going to be the vast majority of it. Make sure people understand what testing is and why that's valuable. Don't just assume that they know. And choose words carefully. Luckily, within our construct-driven school, we have lots of different definitions for things, making sure you're kind of consistent in that kind of message. Safety language. This is something probably more towards the more management side of things, but something that I hold dear to my heart because, as I mentioned, we're a service organization. We have a lot of client-facing documentation. There's a little bit contracty. It's not officially contract. A test plan isn't really a contract, but it is kind of telling people what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. So I've kind of gotten very used to kind of safety language. And what do I mean by safety language? It is making sure that someone who doesn't have domain knowledge has a good understanding about who you are and what you do, but don't back yourself into a corner. Making sure that you're comfortable with what you're agreeing to do. So here's kind of an example of that, and I've highlighted the red areas of that kind of demonstrates the kind of more safety language. Again, this is a little bit old, and I kind of changed this methodology, so don't go too much detail about the actual text here, but you can note that I say automated tests may be added to the continuous things. Because we're going to actually decide at the moment what should be automated, what shouldn't be automated, so I cannot promise or know of in advance about what's going to be automated and what isn't, because we're not there yet, because this is something that I would document early in the process. So I don't know, so I'm not going to say, but I'm going to say what I intend to do. So give people enough information to make sure that they understand your intents, to set clear expectations, but not to back myself into a corner. So lessons learned. There's safety language again. Stuff I didn't do so good. So lessons learned kind of across the way. Make this more of a team effort rather than an individual. I kind of took a lot of this onto myself, and I kind of let the testers test. And there's a couple of different things with that. Number one, I don't test as much anymore, and I miss testing. I love testing, and I don't do it as much anymore, and that makes me sad. But that's just about me, but also just about making sure that other people are kind of contributing so other people can actually answer those questions to be consistent in that message. And it also makes it less about me as an individual and more about the message. If more people are saying the same message as you, then that message becomes more powerful. So make sure you share the load, and it's not just the manager, it's not just the director, it's everyone. Every tester is saying the same thing. Every tester is kind of doing what they can to affect change within their organization. Share the load. Educate up, down, across, and never assume you're done. So people leave, people go. And I said this is over a course of years, so different people in leadership positions have come and gone. You can't just assume that you need to stop educating. So it's because we have new people coming in. They didn't get the same message. You're going to have to do it again all the time. It has to be consistent. And that can be sometimes frustrating, but at the same time also available, because who you are is also going to change. As I mentioned, some of the values is ever evolving. So I set the expectation that who we are today might be slightly different than who we are tomorrow. So you might need to update that information consistently. So education is always really important across the board for up, down, across, and all the time. Celebrate the small victories. As I said, this can kind of be frustrating. Any small change that you do, acknowledge it in the direction that you're trying to go. If there was a difference when I first started here between how you want to be perceived and how you are perceived, and there's a gap there between those two things, how do you going to get there? There's probably going to be very small baby steps. As I said, getting to where we are today took years, and this was actually in a very supportive organization where change is okay. I know in other organizations where change may not be as okay, or you're in a regulatory environment, this might take even longer or even be more difficult. So anything that you can do, again, one of the ones I went here were Carol Brands kind of talked about, she had a win where she kind of was able to do peer testing with someone, and that was something that was new to her organization. That was something that she brought in. That's a win that's worth celebrating. It's small, but she's going to build on it and keep going. And that's what you kind of do. Small victories, build on it, keep going. Have that kind of momentum. And also just acknowledge that things change. As I mentioned, people kind of come and go. Change is okay. You have to be okay with change. Change also about who you are and what you do, and also who and what your organization does, because that might also change over time. You might get a new direction from a new director, and what do you do then? Things will change, and you have to change with it. I think that's really the most important thing here. We as a profession need to continue to evolve. Let's make sure that we are evolving in a direction that we all want to go to, and that's all on us. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. We all can do that. If we don't like the status quo, we all are empowered to change it. You can be that agent of change. So let's make sure that our profession changes into something we want it to be and want it to be part of. So here's when I'm going to go to you. Alex? So we can do this two ways. Because this is a webcast, and because we might be discussing some sensitive things within your organization, that's one reason why I asked you to write some stuff down to people in the room. But I also kind of want to have that kind of discussion a little bit about, is there a difference between how you want to be perceived and how you're currently perceived? And is anyone kind of struggling with that currently that wants to discuss it? Or I'll kind of move to the Post-its. We can do the whole open season thing with cards. And people on the webcast, feel free to kind of, as I mentioned, it is AST_news, and just make sure you have a question mark in there as well if you want to be part of the conversation. Okay.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi.
Kate, can you give us an example of at any time in your career when you felt that there was some negative perception that you saw anybody change permanently for the better?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that I kind of got rid of, and again, this is a very selfish thing, because even as a tester, I really hated writing long-form test scripts. That's why I loved finding the context-driven community, because it was like, oh my God, I don't have to do that anymore. There's something else. So that was the first thing that I did for projects was to, okay, I'm not going to do long-form test scripts on this next project. Rightfully so, the people I talked to said, okay, you're not going to do that. What are you going to do instead? And I'm like, oh crap, I'm not so sure. So then I had to go through and be like, okay, let's go through a lot of documentation. Let's set clear expectations about what I'm going to do instead, kind of reduce risk on a project to prove that I can actually test a project without long-form test scripts and still actually find what we need to find, and we find good bugs. We can actually have that kind of collaboration. So that was over a period of time. One thing that's great about an agency was that there's lots of different projects at flight at once, so I was able to experiment with different things at the same time in parallel. So I'll do different things on different projects and different processes. Depending on the needs of the project, I can do things in kind of a less risky way. And I think you can do that even within other organizations as well. I'm sure there's different side projects or less risky things that you can do to experiment. And that has been a very successful thing, to have proven success stories, to go like, hey, let me try this. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's how I'm going to reduce the risk. I think it's going to be okay. I'll talk to the client. I'll sell it to the client. And that's actually what I do. Most clients still expect the old school kind of factory long-form test scripts. You're going to have bug reports. You're going to do all those things. And right now, I give them none of that. And I have to talk through why that's okay. And that's sometimes difficult to do. But I've already set the expectation, at least in the contract phase, even the SOWs that we have, that it's not a deliverable. So I can usually win those arguments because we've already agreed it's not deliverable. But just kind of going through and setting clear expectations, I'm going to keep going back to that, is kind of how you win that.
Thank you. You said that you want to make sure developers look at you as a support. but we don't break software.
Right.
And I agree. I would like to know, how would you typically approach a developer who gets extremely defensive when you give him or her that kind of news, like a bug or something? Because it can be really hard to get through that shell.
So I think that's absolutely true, but again, I'm going to keep saying it over and over again because I do this at my workplace as well. I set expectation from the start about how we're going to engage, and one of the things I set expectations with now that we're doing a lot of experimentation with is BDD, which is behavior-driven development. So we talk about testing before development even starts. So they're not as worried about defects and bugs because they already know exactly that we're going to engage with you as a developer. You're going to know that it's not antagonistic, that everyone's working together to make a good product. And luckily in an agile environment, it makes it a little bit easier because the whole product team is kind of working together towards an end goal, and it becomes a little bit less us versus them kind of situation already. But you still have those kind of situations, and it's pretty much like, I'm going to walk over and talk to you, and we're just going to work this out. The whole point of this is to make great stuff, and we're all working together to get to that point. If we have testers kind of have that kind of point of view and make sure that the developers feel that that's our point of view, that we're not personal to you, we're all working together to make great stuff, it helps the kind of antagonistic problem.
We got one from the Twitter.
Sure.
Excuse me. It says, Kate, how do you check that your projected image is really sticking with people in different groups, dev, management, etc.?
Can you say that again?
How do you check that your projected image is really sticking with people in different groups?
Oh, I think that's just constant check-ins, and again, because you'll still hit, and I still will hit kind of older kind of points of view, and that's always instead of getting depressed about it, it's an opportunity to educate. So if someone kind of asks me to do something I don't want to do or don't feel is the right thing to do, I won't just say no, I'll say no and necessarily, hey, you know what, we feel it's important to go through this way, and I'm going to I'll talk about what exploratory testing is, the difference between testing and checking, and sometimes they'll just get bored and stop talking to me at that point, or they will kind of really engage and really want to go through that. One of the things that I've kind of done is do workshops for testing for non-testers, where I talk a lot about checking versus testing and have them really feel it so they kind of really know. And I'll do that with a lot of the kind of new project manager, pretty much everyone. I've had people from finance kind of be part of that kind of workshop. So anyone who's really interested in that workshop, and I do it kind of monthly, are kind of welcome to do that, and I can educate them on what exploratory testing is, checking versus testing, what's heuristics, some of those basic concepts. So I don't hit that too much. But if I do, then it's an opportunity to educate.
All right, new thread number 74.
Thanks. So in my organization, we previously were a kind of separate QA team. That was our title. We've been a very strong identity because we worked across multiple different business units. So whilst the individual groups of testers would have been quite siloed, we all sat together in the same area. We'd been doing this for years, very strong social scene. So it was lots of shared information. It was great. Recently, we've dissolved that. We've moved our testers away from the single seating floor area. We've embedded them in teams. We're making them, that much more agile approach. That's proved popular with some. Some testers are finding that very unpopular. They're finding that very uncomfortable. So your comment about make sure all the testers are projecting the same message. What we're struggling with is how do we get the testers who are uncomfortable with this change and are uncomfortable with being embedded in development teams to see the benefits. Our difficulty is with testers rather than with developers to see the benefits.
I think it totally makes sense, and I've definitely felt that same struggle as well. Some testers have really done that really well. Again, we went from waterfall to agile to the same kind of embedded kind of, we're sitting right next to the kind of a cross-functional group. What I found with moving towards agile, and this is not just true for testing, pretty much everyone who's involved to agile in kind of a new space, that it's really hard to know what to do, what to say, how to say it, and when to say it from an agile standpoint, because we have to be very collaborative. And I've also noticed that testers, for the most part, are used to being told, not so much telling. And if you're going to move towards an agile kind of environment, you have to be part of, sprint planning. You have to help estimate a user story, and that's a new concept for a lot of testers. So you have to you can't just put people in a room and expect them to figure out what to do. You do need to educate them. So we've sent them to kind of agile training. We sat down and kind of talked about that as a team, about what some of those struggles are, and kind of educate people not so much about the testing standpoint, but the other stuff about how to actually talk to developers. How do you estimate user stories? Giving them those skills to making sure that they feel comfortable. I think that's been the biggest miss, is that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people, especially at the start. So how do you get them more comfortable? Get them more confident, making sure that you give them the skills necessary to make them successful. And as they become more confident and more successful, they're a little bit more comfortable in the new setting. It takes time, though, as well. It takes time and support. And we're not all 100% there either, but we're getting there. Just patience also helps.
Okay, same thread. Barbara.
We're in the same environment that you're in. And one of the things that does make a difference for everyone is the Scrum Master can take the role of making sure that the test people are included and that they have a voice and that what they say is heard and important. And that will help to make the team more comfortable.
Absolutely. That's part of the educating up, down, across, and all the way. So that's educating Scrum Masters about how to engage with testers and how best to do that, especially on an individual basis. This tester does well in this situation or that situation. You might need to poke them a little bit, or you might need to shut them up, one way or the other. And making sure that everyone's really educated about how to actually go through that. So Scrum Masters, leads on projects that are non-testers will also help testers. So kind of educating across the board is very helpful. I absolutely agree.
119.
119. Oh, here we go. I'm moving.
Hi. So it's kind of similar to that question, but I was thinking sometimes testers start off being all for the new process, but slowly slide back into the test cases. How do you deal with that kind of problem?
How do you feel that they were kind of slipping back into test cases? What was the cause of that?
What was the cause of? I think they were just more comfortable with that approach, and it was easier for them to do it that way.
I think that's also a confidence thing, and making sure that there's lots of opportunity, especially here, to kind of delve into what exploratory testing is, and acknowledging that exploratory testing is hard, and is skill, and a craft, and something you need to work really hard at. And as they kind of acknowledge the fact that it's hard, they'll get better at it. And it's also something that we've done here, is that kind of almost both of those. So just because you don't have test cases, making sure they have something else to make sure that they have something to kind of test against. Acceptance criteria, gherkin scenarios, given when-thens, whatever kind of makes comfortable, rather than those long-form test cases, which is quite often blinders. What you don't want is blinders, but you do want oracles. So making sure they still know what to test and how to test, make sure they have that kind of confidence. That's really what it comes from, making sure that they're comfortable.
Okay, we have a new thread over in
201.
Hi, Kate. Setting expectations is hard. I've written them, I verbally communicated them, and they're still misinterpreted. Can you share with us an example where that has happened to you and what you've done to change the perception in the future?
That's just constant maintenance. Like, it doesn't happen once. So you have to educate it and market that particular change. I'll go back to the kind of not doing test scripts anymore. I will still, to this day, we haven't done test scripts in 2 years, edit out the fact that we're on client-facing documents that we're going to do test cases as a deliverable. We don't do it anymore. We haven't done it in years. I still have to edit it out. So it's just constant maintenance. And when I do that, I just remind people, it's almost like not really apologetic. It's like, here's our standard. We're not doing that anymore. If you want me to, you need to give me a very good reason, because I still want to be collaborative. I still want to listen to you. But in general, we don't do that. That's not really something that we do anymore. Here's the documentation where I wrote it down. Remember that we talked about it in that meeting. It's just constant all the time, hitting on it, and marketing it. Making sure that they're kind of really aware of it. Going to the leads of whoever you're trying to change and be like, hey, make sure that you tell your team X, Y, and Z, because we've changed things, and making sure that they know about that. And what is the best way to talk to your team? Finding different ways of doing it. Maybe documentation. We use Confluence for stuff. No one else has the tech team looks at Confluence but us. So I need to find other ways to figure out how I can actually talk to other groups, because they're using different kinds of tracking tools or whatever. What is the best way to communicate this message to you? And asking them that question. Obviously, the message isn't getting across for whatever reason. What is the best way to relay this message? Being very collaborative, talking about it, but also kind of taking that firm stance. There's a line about how far I'm going to go. I'm the professional. This is why I'm here. This is why I have a job. You're coming to me because I have a level of expertise. So I know where the line is. But I'll let it be a little bit fuzzy about where it needs to be, and I'm willing to hear you if you have a difference of opinion, and kind of have that kind of conversation. Kind of have that almost illusion of kind of collaboration, but you still kind of get to the point where you want to be. Does that help?
Okay, do we have any new threads? Any more green cards? Oh, 167. And stand up, please.
Actually, it's not an entirely new thread. This is to address the previous two questions about the discomfort that the testers had about moving near the development team, and partly to address your concern also. So based on some of the teams that I've seen which work really well at my company, what I've observed is that essentially the team culture is very important. The teams that work really well in my company, the culture that they have is there's no demarcation between developers and testers. The way that they try to reach a hybrid role is developers try to write unit tests and actually ask the QA about what are all the relevant unit tests and whether they make sense. The way that QAs contribute to development is they may not write the development code, but they actually fix bugs, which involves looking into the production code and then trying to fix issues that their tests actually find. So that way there's a common ground that they try to reach. And when it comes to story pointing that you were addressing, in an agile environment, especially, story pointing should include development as well as testing effort. If story pointing does not include testing, then something is not right with the system, or it's not right with the way the agile methodology is being implemented. So generally we allocate story points. So if we say it's a 5-pointer story, it means it includes development time as well as testing. But if testing is kept aside, then there is a concern there, and that needs to be addressed. But long story short, I think at the end of the day, it all depends on the culture of the team. That way, agile methodology works a lot better, and these concerns are usually, they seem to be prevalent wherever there's waterfall method being used. In fact, that's a sense that I got off during CAST. It's a common problem that I'm sensing from the questions across various sessions. If you have waterfall model where development stops and then testing begins, there's a clear line of demarcation where development team just throws their hands up and they're like, the next phase is up to you. Rather than an agile environment where both of them are working together to complete the feature to meet a deadline. So just some thoughts.
Absolutely, and I agree. I think it's a little bit easier in agile environments, but we still have to educate. Again, even though this is kind of our standard, the fact that, you know, when you're estimating a user story, that testing is part of that, is still something, an expectation we need to set at the start of every single project. The concept of a definition of done is awesome. It means that we're not gatekeepers. Something is done not because QA or test has said it's done, it's because the definition of done has been met. And that takes it off of us and onto a shared idea about what done is, and that's super awesome. But there's definitely lots of organizations that are a little bit more waterfall than what do you do in those sorts of situations. I still think that there's concepts that you can employ from things like BDD. If you read a book about BDD, you're probably not going to be able to do all the BDD or TDD or any of those kinds of things. But you can still take those concepts. You can still talk about testing before development has actually started, even in a waterfall situation. There's no reason why a tester can't talk to a developer earlier on in the process, even if it's not like official. You can still have that kind of a meeting or call that meeting, and it's just going to slowly kind of move from there. So I think even in waterfall situations, there are small things that you can do to get to where you need to go. It's harder, I acknowledge that, but I still think it can be done.
Have we got more questions?
How are we doing on time? $151.
Oh,
There's one from there.
Good. And 151, we'll start here while we're getting the tweet.
What's a good way to tell if you've got a bad brand?
If you have a bad brand, then I think when I go back to the sticky notes, which I will get to if there's lots of time, but if there isn't, then I'll go to it later. If your actual is different than expected, this is one reason why I said actual versus expected, because that's a bug. That's an easy way to realize that your brand isn't what you want it to be. If how you want to be perceived isn't really how you're perceived, that's a problem. But the first step is, how do you want to be perceived? If you don't know that, you can't really answer the question about is your brand being good or bad, because you don't know what your brand is. The first step is to really, what do you want to be? What is your brand? Cartier, from my understanding. That's the brand you want to be. Or is it Walmart? And Walmart makes a lot of money, so maybe you do want to be Walmart. I'm not judging about what your brand should actually be. I'm saying that you should have one. I think there's one from Twitter.
I got one more from the Twitter printer. What do you say to a customer experienced QA that insists their experience outweighs your suggested way of testing?
The customer experience, I can assume?
Yeah.
Is that what it says?
What do you say to a customer, in quotes, experienced QA that insists their experience outweighs your suggested way of testing?
That's kind of harder, and I'll see if I can. It's hard for me to say in too much detail without naming names a little bit within my organization, but I've definitely had that within a very large company that you've definitely heard of, where they were used to doing gates, which are used to doing more waterfall kind of situation, and they had a very difficult time with my crazy cowboy agile style of lack of documentation, and kind of working through that. So it is talking about the value of things. I always get back to the value of things, going back to why business is important. What is the value of what we're trying to achieve? Is that document you want me to produce actually valuable? Understand that you want me to do that, that I'm not doing this. If you want me to produce a document that no one's going to read, because no one's going to read it, I'm not going to be able to do testing. And you've kind of talked about what Agile is, so we have a short time period of time. What do you want me to do, X or Z? So which one do you want? And usually they'll choose the one that's more valuable, which is usually testing. So always go back to what is the value of what we're trying to achieve, and question. We're doing this because we've always done this. Question standards. I've talked about standards. This is our standard way of doing things, but standards should be changeable. It's not process for the sake of process. It's process to actually make sure things aren't chaotic. That's good process. Not bad process, not bad standards. Some standards could be good just to kind of set expectations, but standards that are set in stone that are not changeable are not necessarily good standards. Always question the value of something and what it actually brings to for the project. When I've been in those situations where I'm questioning the value, it is pretty much, I have to create this document because otherwise I'm going to be fired if I don't. I understand that it's going to be very valuable to you, but it's not valuable to the project. Going back to that money type of situation, what I can give to the table is more valuable to the project than what you're trying to ask me to do from a testing standpoint. And I can talk through about that in detail, and that's the level of conversation that I'm going to do. I will always question the value of something that you want me to do. Is this valuable? Is it a good thing? Or are you just asking me because you think it's a good thing because you read it in a book somewhere? Usually they read it in a book somewhere, and I can talk through that. I've also read books. My books might be better than your books. I don't know. Cool.
All right, we have until 2:45.
Really?
Yeah, so if you've got some Post-its you want to look at.
Okay. It's a little bit shorter than I expected. So I'm going to go through a little bit of kind of the differences here, and we'll kind of talk through why that might be some differences. So how they kind of want to be kind of perceived is the current actual of how they're currently perceived is not much, in quotes, scripted, phased activity done after development by testers, and where they want to be is information gathered and reported by testers by exploration to help inform decisions. So there's a mismatch here, and I think we talked through a little bit about the details of what that needs to be, but it's also not necessarily talking about what the possible branding of that could be. So talking about what your brand could be is talking about how valuable that information is, always going back to that value judgment, and making sure that when you're having those discussions to kind of bring the actual towards the expected, is talking about those value points. What are the value of scripts? That is really what I talked about and how I got out of it. It is, I'm spending, the biggest project that I worked on was 1.5 years of my life. Never went to production. So a bit of a waste, but not really a waste because I learned a lot through it. It's actually one way I got actually promoted was because that project went really badly, and they appreciated not how I did things when things were going well, they appreciated how I worked with people when things were going really badly. And they saw and appreciated that, and that's one reason why I actually got promoted out of that situation. But that was that kind of, we spent 2 months just writing test scripts. That was during our waterfall days. And that were immediately that no one read, that were immediately out of date, and it was just a very big waste. So it's easy to point to that, about how much money you spent. Again, and we're by hours, we're expensive. You wasted 2 months of like 5 people just writing test scripts that we weren't actually very usable. What is the value of that? If you're going to actually write test scripts, I'd rather actually put the effort towards automation. If you're going to be kind of rote step-by-step instructions, computers are super awesome at that. Let computers do that. But if you really want to find and explore how a product is, or a project is really kind of doing, let humans kind of explore that, especially for us when touchy-feely stuff is really important. How the look and feel of something is so important for us as a kind of advertising agency, because that's really what people are coming to us to do. They want to have that look and feel, and one of our heuristics is making sure that we're delivering that look and feel the client actually wants. Because they're coming to us to change how people are perceived their particular company. We want to make sure that what we're developing is actually making that change, and that's something that we bring as value to testers, as tester to the actual project. So actual versus expected. Actual is important work, but doesn't require much skill. Testers just need to know the product well. Expected should be testers are part of a discipline that takes skill, dedication, and more than just gaming the project, knowing the product well. I think this kind of goes to a kind of a way to get there, is kind of going through again, kind of making sure people understand what testing is and the skills involved in it, and educating people about that. There's a couple of different things within my organization. Your organization might be different. So we have, tech breakfasts where we kind of have presentations to kind of things like that as well. Any kind of time that you can have an opportunity to give a presentation that people may or may not go to, talk about what exploratory testing is and what it isn't. That's also pretty important as well. Exploratory testing isn't just pointing and clicking. That was one thing that one of our testers kind of joked about what he did, kind of going back to the thing about talking about like, I break stuff. I point and click. That's what I do for a job. No, you really don't. You do a lot more than that. You bring more to the table. Understand that and talk about what you do differently. It's important. You're a smart dude. Be a smart dude. So talk about what exploratory testing is and what value you bring to the table. Change how you actually talk about testing with people. Talk about what you actually found through that exploratory testing process. Talk about how hard exploratory testing is. Challenge developers to do exploratory testing. I've done that. They're super great at checking, actually. They're really great at checking. Once you kind of let them understand the difference between the two, I've had some developers that are great exploratory testers too. Once you kind of show what the difference is, people really do appreciate what testing really can bring to the table once you kind of show what that difference is. I'm going to keep going unless other people have points. You can always raise your card. Expected is as equal, extremely valued. Actual can be disruptive but beneficial. I think we talked about this a little bit, about the disruption kind of part, but in other sessions, but I'll kind of bring it in here. If you make your interactions consistent and if you're always having check-ins with people, even if you're doing it in more of a waterfall things where you're kind of more of a silo, and you have more consistent check-ins, then you're less disruptive because your conversations are normal, not disruptive. So if you have more consistent communication with people, then you have both positive and negative things. How are things going today? Nothing really happened today, everything's fine. That's kind of positive, versus, hey, I found some stuff. If you have more consistent check-ins, it's less disruptive because you have set the expectation that we're going to be talking about stuff in this particular point of time. So you've set the expectation we're talking about stuff, and that stuff is just normal and boring. So it's not disruptive, it's just normal. This is just the normal part of software development. It's not crazy, it's not disruptive. This is just what we do. We're just working together to make good stuff. This is very colorful. Expected. Testing and development should be part of the same process, not antagonistic, treated equally. Actual is nice to have, claimed to be an absolute requirement, but not something to give resources to. Yeah, that's difficult. Let's talk about resources for a second. I think as I mentioned before about how that is in my organization, it's kind of hard to get. I try to have, percentage of testers to dev is always kind of a hit or miss type of situation. For me, in an agile environment, I try to promote the idea that QA should be 50% of dev, and that QA starts when dev starts. We start at sprint 1. We just kind of set that expectation. It doesn't always happen. Again, kind of going back to the constraints of how the costs are involved with that, so we may not be able to do 50%, it might be slightly less than that. But then I set the expectation, if you want the percentage to be less, if you're not going to have as much resources, then we need to be creative about the resources that we have. You're not going to have the same level when we're talking about, what I keep on talking about with testing, about being embedded and empowered, all those kinds of things. You may not be able to do that because you have a lot more work through 1 or 2 people, and that's difficult to maintain. So we need to be creative. So that tester might even be the test expertise. Then you might have to set the expectation that the project manager might have to do some testing, or the developer might do some testing. So then the tester is less about testing, but making sure the testing is done in the least risky way possible within that actual environment. So if you have less people, set the expectation early on about what that means exactly. What's the risk associated with that? And I've certainly been in that situation, but you set the kind of clear expectation of risk. Actual is necessary evil. Expected a valuable part of the product and development process. I think we touched on a bunch of those things, but that kind of necessary evil kind of speaks to the point of only doing this because this is what is expected to be done and this is an industry standard, and then QA is just a check mark. And okay, we've tested it, check. Not really understanding what it is and what's involved in that. And that kind of speaks to the kind of education about what value you bring. And I do promote it, and I think people, especially in our little organization, kind of get mad at me for doing this, promote the idea that testing is the majority of the value that we bring to the table, but it's not all the value that we bring to the table. And finding other ways of expressing the other non-tangible value that you bring to the table is very helpful to get people to change ideas about what testing actually is. If you're looking through designs and saying like, hey, you know what? I've tested overlays like that before, and there's always a bug in it. Why don't you design it like this? That actually won't be a iPad versus in portrait. You wouldn't actually have that kind of bug that way. You've kind of solved the problem before it started. You found a bug before you even got it coded. Having that kind of interaction and having that value, yeah, it's still kind of testing, but it's testing earlier, finding different ways of adding value to a project. For us, sometimes we talked about, we'll take on the browsers and device support. Or for some reason, we're always like, I don't know about you guys, but no one understands how to use Jira or whatever tracking tool you're using. For some reason, that's always us. You guys know how to use it. We'll set up all the whole Jira or tracking tool for you because apparently we know it the best. Mostly because we like process, because otherwise things get chaotic and that makes us nervous as testers. So we like to kind of set things up. So if somehow we got involved with being really good about kind of Jira workflows and things like that too. So people come to our kind of expertise for that, as opposed to just testing. And just testing, I know that sounds bad too, because testing is obviously extremely valuable. Expected, an important part of the many steps of the process. Actual, an important step in the process. Oh, awesome. Someone has a good experience. Could probably end a little bit. We'll probably end a little bit earlier, unless you want me to kind of keep going. Is there anything else? Everyone cool with kind of ending now, or is there something else anyone wants to bring to the table or have discussions? I'm here for the next couple of days if you want
I can ask one.
Something. Sure.
If facilitators are allowed to ask.
Yes.
Just curious, in building the brand and developing it, is there a moment you had missteps or missed moments where you had that conversation with somebody in a different team that made a comment and you kind of let it go and you realize, I just missed a moment to kind of sell the brand?
Picking your battles is difficult because one of the pet peeves I have is using QAing to mean testing. I think God kills a kitten whenever someone says that. And I put posters to that effect around it so people are reminded of it. But I'm not gonna actually point that out every single time someone makes that mistakes. I'm not going to point out every single time someone talks about test scripts or things like that unless they're promising it to a client. It's just kind of picking battles and knowing when to be annoying and not annoying. I've definitely towed the line and crossed the line into annoying at some things. So if someone's talking about, QA is one of those things like, oh wait, someone's talking about QA, I need to be listening. I need to make sure that people are talking about in the way that I want it to be talking about for branding. Then you get to be like that kind of reputation of like, oh, you don't need to push so hard. It's knowing how hard to push. Sometimes I push too hard. It's very difficult to find that line. So that would kind of be that one of the experiences like, I didn't pick my battles all that great. Or I kind of like, that person didn't need to be educated at that point in time about what the difference between QAing and testing is. Choosing when to do those types of things is very kind of difficult to do.
All right, we have a new green card.
I was just wondering what kind of resources you've used, books, blogs, to educate testers.
Sure. I, as you might expect, kind of use a lot of James Buck stuff, a lot of Michael Bolton stuff. But I'll usually repackage it with citations. Matt I use a lot of Matt stuff, a lot of Karen stuff, and then kind of have focused education with the testers. So it might be a workshop for them, it might be a team meeting where we just focus on a specific aspect of what we're trying to do, and I'll bring those concepts to them, but I won't necessarily bring the same concepts packaged the way that James or Michael will have it, because I want it to be in the context of what we do. It has to be very actionable for them. Rather than kind of a concept over here. So I'll do a lot of research, and I definitely encourage them to do research as well. So they'll kind of share blogs and stuff with me, and that's great, awesome. We have people here, Curtis and Elizabeth are here from Huge, and they bring a lot to the table as well. Claire, if you're watching, also brings a lot to the table as well. So kind of getting that from everywhere else. But if I bring it into Huge, I will Hugify it, and making sure it's very actionable for the people I'm talking to. So I will repackage all the things that I've learned, which is mostly James and Michael's and some of the names you know from Context Driven.
Yeah, oh, same thread, and you're across the room.
Huge is more distributed amongst multiple cities.
Yes, it is indeed.
How do you handle training for multiple cities? How do you get that message across in Atlanta, in New York City? How does that work?
Sure. So recently we put in the concept of guilds, which is kind of across the company. So there's like a QA guild, and that is a cross-office guild. So we'll have meetings, and we'll either do a conference call or something like that, but that will be, I know all the QA for all the offices, and they're all invited. This is all volunteer. The people want to be part of the guild or not to be part of the guild. But if they want to be part of the guild, then we'll kind of meet on a regular basis, talk about stuff, and work together as a group to either share ideas or work together to kind of to research. Okay, we want to do more research into like what mobile testing is, or kind of okay, how do we deal with device management? That's actually a big deal for us, and we kind of work together to get that done. So it's not even necessarily training from me, but just making sure that we have that consistent message across the different offices. And we just pretty much do that by having constant check-ins. Again, so if you have a kind of constant check-in, that communication isn't novel, it's normal.
Okay, we have a new thread, 166. Please stand.
We're talking about branding and consistent message. I just wanted to ask if you've encountered a situation where you have, in my organization, we're kind of just starting out with the software test, and we have multiple voices who have a different idea of what the brand should be and what the message should be. Have you encountered that, or what suggestions might you have in that situation?
No, I still encounter that. I think even us as testers, we kind of have different ideas, but that kind of speaks to the collaboration standpoint. So, but I would suggest doing that collaboration amongst yourselves before moving non-disciplined people into it, and then coming to that kind of complete message. You might need to like succeed ground for now. It may not be the direction that you 100% want to go, but as long as don't hate it, go in that direction and then continue to try to convince them the direction that you want to go. But the consistency of brand is extremely important. So you need to have that kind of agreement within yourselves as testers about the direction that you want to go. If you have a lead or a manager, obviously that voice is probably heavier, but that doesn't mean you don't have one, and should be part of that conversation.
All right, we got another one from Twitter. It says, what is your way of proofing that requirements are fulfilled? Please tell us about your secret sauce.
It's a mix of A1 and ketchup. So we are in an agile environment. We work on user stories that have acceptance criteria, and we use Jira as a tool. So the acceptance criteria is pretty much everything we do is on the user story basis, and all of our documentation is on that user story basis. So a lot of what I try to explain to people on is that we don't necessarily document stuff ahead of time. We might document stuff after it. So we don't really do session-based tests or anything like that at all. We'll do, the vast majority of what we do is pure exploratory testing. So we'll look at the acceptance criteria of a user story, we'll do whatever testing needs to be done, and then we'll actually document afterwards that some of the testing that we might, from high-level scenario standpoint, here's some of the things that I've tested, here's the defects associated with it, and if we actually have bugs, we'll associate with that user story as well. So everything we do is commented on the user story, all the things are just all in that one user story place, and the user story itself is that documentation. I don't feel it is necessary for me to prove that I've tested or not tested something. The proof is in good working software. And that's a concept of Agile, so it's easy for me to kind of make that conversation with people, that the proof is working software. So if we have a demo at the end of 2 weeks, and we have a demo with the client usually, if it's working and working the way the client wants, that's the proof that we've done our job successfully. And it's our job. It is not testers, it's not developers, it's not the BA. It's everyone's job to make sure that user story is completed successfully. Again, it's that definition of done, which is a shared idea of what done is, and that definition of done might be different for different project teams. The teams actually decide what a definition of done actually means. So it might be for some teams that minor defects are okay. Other teams might mean that all the defects have to be closed before that user story can be considered done. It does depend on the team. But the team makes that decision. So it's not the testers kind of going in and out or kind of proving what is or is not. It is a team that is focused on good working software. So for us, that's very helpful. It's a little bit disingenuous to saying that I had much to do with that. It is more about I kind of informed the more testing aspect of that. A lot of those ideals came from the rest of the company and the cultural shift that we went through as a company, moving from waterfall to more of an agile, very engineering-focused company, which we kind of happened over time. And we had a lot of great supporters from lots of different areas. So it was a little bit easier for me, and I'll totally admit that. But all I supplied was, okay, you're going agile. What do we do from a testing standpoint? And there's lots of different experiments to kind of get where we are today. In addition, from an automation standpoint, we might use Gherkin. So a non-coding tester will write some Gherkin to inform automation. So if we don't have a QA engineer or a automation engineer focused on that, we'll have a developer actually write the step definitions for automation. But they're not doing that in a vacuum. They'll partner with a tester who's an expert in testing to kind of figure out what should and shouldn't be automated. So the non-coding analyst will actually inform the automation process, even though they're not doing the automation themselves. Very collaborative, working it out. So if there's any kind of documentation, there might be some documentation in the form of Gherkin scenarios, but that's not the most important thing. The thing about Agile is documentation is important, working software is important. Does it work? Yes, we're done. I think that's it.
I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Great, thank you.
Right.